Okay.
Hello, my name is Anthony Gifford. You're probably tuning in this because of something I've either said or written or maybe just heard about. I'm an educator. I come from a mother and father who are educators, and their brothers and sisters too. Educators in so many ways are reformers. Educators hope for the best and always have to be very hopeful people. I follow in the steps, I hope, of Jesus of Nazareth, who was an educator and a reformer 2,000 years ago. It's really diabolically almost, and certainly sad, that today the religious in so much of what we call the Christian world, the very term religious is a bad term. It means somebody who's unthinking, narrow-minded, judgmental, condemning everybody else to hell, which is the furthest thing that could have been how things started out. I am not a religious person in that sense. I'm not a dogmatic Christian, but I know within my heart and my soul that there's much in the way of Jesus' teaching and life for us to follow and learn from. The change came about in the 300s when the writings of the early Christian church became items of worship and not of doing. In Jesus' time, it was a trying and exciting and terrible and fearful time. Under the Romans, where people were being killed for any reason at all, where greed and military might ruled, doesn't sound too different than a lot of things now. In that time, Jesus offered a new way. The kingdom of God, as he called us, something very real, something very, very eminent, something doable, something very frightening if you were wealthy or powerful. And of course, he got killed for it. Now, our Gospels aren't from that time. Our Gospels were written at least 2 generations, maybe 3 later, when Jesus' followers originally, the original followers had been killed off by the Romans. All that we had were the people of Greek thinking who had come to understand the teachings of, or the reality of God through the teachings of Jesus, and who couldn't separate the two. So for them, Jesus became literally God. And the Gospels were written in that time. But even they were not written to be the be-all and end-all. I'd like to just remind you, if you haven't, maybe for the first time. It says the Gospel according to Luke, which is a lie. It doesn't say that in the Greek. We don't know who wrote the Gospels. It wasn't until a couple hundred years later for these unnamed writings to be, you had to call them something, so might as well call them Luke or Matthew. But we don't know that. Let me read. Since many have undertaken to set down an orderly account of the events which have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the very first, to write down an orderly account for you, that you may know the truth concerning all the things about which you have been instructed. The Gospel writers don't claim to know everything. In fact, right off, they're at least third hand. But they're putting things down in a way that makes sense to their time, which was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, many years after Jesus, by a very different culture. And the Gospels were there to answer the questions they had. One of the main questions was, how do you follow a Jew who was killed by the Romans and not kill off Romans? Well, the followers knew that the way of Jesus was one of peace and nonviolence. But instead of doing this by essay form, as we might today, they did it in gospel form, telling a story, using the sayings of Jesus that had been passed down, but putting them in a story form so that people in their time would live a life of faithfulness and understand as best they could. And that's wonderful. The trouble is, we don't live in the year 80. We don't have to worry about, well, their kind of Romans, a little bit different kind of Romans, but you get my picture. Now, what I've done is blasphemous to most dogmatic Christians. I have written again a gospel. Now, I've put it through the eyes of somebody else. I put it through the eyes of an old Jewish person who actually knew Jesus, unlike the gospel writers that we have now. I've used the sayings of Jesus that are all there. I've put them, but the story form, I've done my best to recreate the drama, the tragedy, the questions of faithfulness that Jesus and his followers actually experienced. The Jews are not the bad guys. The Romans are, which is a real difference. No matter if we are believers or not, Jesus is without a doubt the most important person in history. So it's important, I think, for all of us, just from that perspective, to do what we can to widen our vision, to get a handle on what happened and what might have happened. I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm guessing as much as anybody in many cases, but I've studied theology, I've gone to seminary, I've done my best to read as broadly as I can. So I've got a pretty good idea. At least I have the questions that might be asked, and I'm hoping that you might find this helpful. It's short. I've done my best to keep it in the same kind of length and style of the original Gospels, which is a pretty well a no-nonsense critique of writing. It's a small book. I'm hoping, though, that this will be encouragement to you and an education. Above all, a way that might prod you to ask more questions, because if that happens, it truly is gospel. It's good news for all of us, no matter how we might believe. Thank you so much.